Good morning, everyone. Good morning. My name is Nina Murray, and I'm Head of Policy and Research at the European Network on Statelessness. It's a real pleasure on behalf of ENS to welcome you to our webinar today, our annual State of Play assessment on statelessness in Europe. For those of you not familiar with ENS, we are a civil society alliance of over 160 organisations and individuals working to address statelessness in 41 countries around Europe through law and policy development, awareness raising and capacity building. We're very excited to have had over 400 registrations for today's webinar. So please say hi in the chat, and if you like, tell us your name and where you're joining us from today or your organisation. We're also going to post a quick poll just to find out a bit more about our audience today. I can already see, there's the poll, so I can already see that we have lots of people joining us. We have 144 people already logged on, so welcome. We're just asking you a couple of quick questions to find out more about you. I'm seeing people saying hi from Lisbon already. Tell us where you're dialing in from if you like. So our poll is already showing us that our audience today feels like they have some knowledge of statelessness, which is great. A few people not really, and a bit of a mix in terms of whether you've used the Statelessness Index before in your work. So good to see at least that some people are using it sometimes, regularly. So that's great. Thank you for completing the poll, and we'll leave it there for a couple more minutes for you just to keep answering. Fantastic. So today we're very excited to launch the annual update of our Statelessness Index, which now assesses and compares the performance of 27 European countries, examining how they protect stateless people on their territory and what they're doing to prevent and reduce statelessness. We launched the index back in March 2018 to provide an easy way to understand differences in law, policy and practice, identify good practices and areas that need to be improved by states. And 3 years on, with over 19,000 users, the index has become an important tool for raising awareness and focusing our advocacy needed to end statelessness and improve stateless people's access to rights. So thank you again for taking time out of your busy days to hear more from our exciting lineup of speakers and to learn more about statelessness in Europe. We hope you'll all stay engaged with our work beyond the webinar today. So before I tell you a little bit more about the webinar today and who you'll be hearing from, I just have a couple of quick points of housekeeping. So if I can ask colleagues to turn to the next slide. We are recording the session today and we'll make it available publicly afterwards. The chat's not visible in the recording, so don't worry about that. Participant microphones and cameras, you will have noticed, are switched off. So please use the chat function to ask questions as we go along. And also, of course, feel free to email us afterwards with further questions, comments and feedback. So turning to the agenda for today's session, the aim of today's webinar is to present key trends and data emerging from the Statelessness Index, to reflect on progress over the last 3 years, and to identify key areas for action and reform going forwards. So after a presentation from me on the state of play analysis that we're launching today, we have a fantastic panel of 5 invited experts who are going to reflect on what we've presented, what the trends mean for national governments, stateless communities, international organizations, regional institutions, and civil society. We very much hope there will be time for questions at the end, so please get your questions ready, post them in the chat, as I said, and colleagues will collate them and we'll put as many of them as possible to our experts at the end. So without further ado, let's kick off with our state of play assessment. So this is what I'm going to cover in the next 15 minutes or so. I'm going to start with a very quick introduction to the index, followed by some reflections on general trends over the last 3 years since March 2018, before highlighting 4 key challenges that we've identified as requiring urgent attention at this time. So that is protection gaps, detention, the child's right to a nationality, and reduction. So first of all, what is the index? Those of you, look like from the poll that many of you have accessed the index already, but just in terms of a quick overview. So the index is a comparative tool. And as I said, it assesses and compares the performance of 27 countries in Europe against international norms and good practice. And it examines how they are protecting, how these states are protecting stateless people on their territory and what they're doing to prevent and reduce statelessness. So today, we're launching 3 new country profiles on Albania, Croatia, and Ireland, as well as an update for 24 existing profiles. And we're also launching a new resources section on the website, which aims to make it easier to search the hundreds of sources referenced across the index. This aspect of the index is a work in progress, so check it out today, but please do keep checking back over the next few weeks as we add more sources to the database. So each year we work with our index country partners in all of the index countries to review and update the detailed country surveys, which are the backbone of the analysis in the index. So we check for updated statistics, amendments to law and policy, government commitments, new norms, and evidence of emerging trends from practice. And then we review the benchmarking assessments. It's a tremendous team effort, often with several experts involved in each country. So I just quickly want to take this opportunity to say a huge thank you to all of our country experts and partners for the really hard work and commitment that makes the index what it is. We really couldn't do it without you. And I know many of them are here today joining us, so thank you. And all of this means that the index is a live tool for us all to monitor trends in law, policy, and practice, to celebrate progress, get informed, and to hold states to account when they don't live up to their commitments. So you can find more details on the methodology behind the index on the index website, including who is involved in each country and a list of norms and good practices that we use to benchmark performance. So moving on to those general trends. So what are the general trends that we can identify in terms of progress towards ending statelessness in Europe over the last 3 years? And where are the remaining sticking points? So what's clear from reviewing the data in the index is that progress is slow, perhaps even painfully slow. There are clear protection gaps and rights violations that remain unaddressed. So that's not to say we haven't seen some progress. Of course, we have. And for example, in Ukraine and Albania, we've seen some steps forward recently. In other countries, however, like the Netherlands, there's been promises of reform, but this has stalled for several years. And still other countries, unfortunately, including, for example, Bulgaria, Moldova, and Greece, we've even seen some steps backward in the last few years, actively restricting the rights of stateless people or removing safeguards to prevent statelessness. But above all, far too many states are yet to take any action at all to fulfill their obligations under the international conventions that they've signed up to. So as you can see from the slide, of the 5 thematic areas that we cover in the index, it's quite telling, we think, that the most positive assessments can be found under the theme that assesses whether states have acceded to relevant international human rights treaties or regional treaties. And most index countries are party to the 1954 convention, for example, except for Cyprus and Poland. And all but 7 index countries are also party to the 1961 convention. And many have also signed up to the European Convention on Nationality. And we shouldn't forget that all European countries have specific obligations under international human rights treaties to uphold and protect the right to nationality in a non-discriminatory, non-arbitrary way. And yet, despite all these obligations on paper, when it comes to implementation, performance is much weaker across the board. So we really think that one of the general trends we see is that it's time for states to be held to account on these failings, and we need to use the index to set out a clear roadmap for reform. So although there are several areas where international obligations are being neglected, I want to highlight 4 particular challenges as we launch this year's update. So these are the four, and first starting with protection gaps. So only 10 of the 27 index countries have statelessness determination procedures in place. And if I can ask for the next slide, please. The others have only limited, if any, means of identifying who they owe specific international obligations to on their territory. So nearly 70 years since the 1954 Convention was adopted, in most European countries, stateless people still face immense hurdles to accessing even the most basic rights that we take for granted. So we think we have to ask why is it taking so long when we have model legislation, we have guidance and good practice examples that are widely available. And that's not to say we haven't seen any progress. Of course, we know that some new procedures are in the pipeline. For example, Ukraine and Bulgaria have recently introduced new procedures. The Ukrainian procedure looks broadly to be in line with good practice. And just today, we heard that bylaws for the implementation of this new procedure are being discussed today in the Ukrainian parliament. So that's sounding really positive for adoption of those bylaws very soon. We know that discussions are ongoing in Malta and the Netherlands, for example, about introducing new procedures. Although, as I mentioned, in the case of the Netherlands, this has been pending for some time. But unfortunately, we also see steps backward, as I said. So in the case of Bulgaria, new restrictions came into force just last week to undermine access to protection for stateless people. And the second area I want to highlight is detention. And unfortunately, no country in the index is assessed positively across this theme. So stateless people really are invisible in immigration detention across Europe. Data is extremely patchy, so we don't actually know how many stateless people are affected by immigration detention. What we do know is that legal safeguards on paper are inadequate to prevent arbitrary detention of stateless people. Only a handful of countries, for example, require a country of removal to be identified prior to detaining someone for removal. Statelessness is not considered a factor increasing vulnerability, and it's rarely considered juridically relevant in decisions to detain. And we know more broadly that the use of detention around Europe is increasing, and stateless people are undoubtedly caught up in this trend, along with others. And we've seen, for example, in index updates in recent years, expanding grounds for detention, increasing use of detention in countries like Germany, Greece, Hungary, and Malta. And for example, in 2020, we've seen restrictions, COVID-19 restrictions affecting access to effective remedies for people in detention in, for example, Italy and Bulgaria. Then the third area I want to highlight relates to the child's right to nationality. So back in 2015, ENS published a report that revealed that half of European countries were not meeting their obligations to ensure that all children born who would otherwise be stateless, born on the territory, acquired a nationality. And nearly 6 years on, only Norway and Albania have slightly tipped this balance towards the positive. So still almost half of European countries permit some children, to be born stateless on their territory in their law. So what's more, even where states do have safeguards in place, these are not always being used. So for example, in Malta and Croatia, existing safeguards appear not to be used in practice. Another issue is where safeguards that should be automatic are actually requiring children to prove their statelessness in burdensome procedures, and that we can see that in Belgium, Italy, Portugal, Serbia, for example. Switzerland and Cyprus still have no safeguard, and Moldova unfortunately lowered its safeguard in 2018, restricting what was a full safeguard to a partial one, restricting its application to children with a legally residing parent. And that's not to mention barriers to birth registration and lack of mechanisms to determine where a child would otherwise be stateless and therefore apply existing safeguards, which continue to exacerbate the problem. So all of this means that states in Europe are complicit in permitting children to grow up stateless in Europe. The last area I want to highlight is reduction. And as we all know, the only way to resolve a person's statelessness is for them to acquire a nationality. Under the 1954 Convention, states are required, as far as possible, to facilitate naturalization for stateless people on their territory. But unfortunately, the index shows the opposite is happening. So there are significant barriers to naturalization in many countries. For example, prohibitively high fees in the UK, long residence requirements in Spain, inflexible documentation requirements in the Netherlands, and discretionary national interest or good character clauses in Hungary, and different combinations of all of these in many other index countries. These are just some examples. So we really think change in this particular area could quickly and dramatically reduce statelessness in a migratory context in Europe. But the other crucial aspect to reduction, of course, is how states are progressing towards reducing their in situ statelessness, stateless populations. And this is not about granting protection and providing for discretionary naturalization. This is about measures to identify and eliminate discriminatory laws, policies, and practices that perpetuate intergenerational statelessness and risk of statelessness among mostly minoritized and marginalized populations. It's about confirming and issuing proof of nationality to those who lack it. So in Europe, this is primarily about measures to address the protracted statelessness of groups like ethnic Russians in the Baltic states and Roma and other minority groups in the Western Balkans, for example, and countries of the former Soviet Union. Again, some progress has been made in this area, of course, including through legislative reform in countries like North Macedonia, Latvia, and Albania, but it's often fragile progress, and solutions can be partial, they can be short-term, and sometimes they facilitate access to specific rights without addressing barriers to equal citizenship, and so failing to tackle the root cause of the problem. And really in the last year, the COVID-19 pandemic has shown us starkly why we need to find ways to put politics aside and guarantee the right to nationality for every person who is stateless or at risk of statelessness in Europe. So with that, I'm going to end my presentation and turn to our panel of invited experts to hear their reflections, responses, and recommendations for the way forward. So each of our 5 panelists is going to give us a 5-minute reflection on the state of play analysis, index data from their different perspectives. So first of all, it's a real pleasure to introduce the Deputy Minister of the Interior for Albania, Mr. Julian Hodaj. So if I can ask you to turn on your camera, Mr. Hodaj. Welcome. So Albania is one of the few countries in the index that has not only pledged reform in this area, but we've actually seen concrete action very recently with the introduction of a new safeguard earlier this year to prevent children being born stateless in Albania. And as I understand it, a draft bill is also currently being discussed for the introduction of a statelessness determination procedure. So thank you for joining us, Julian, and we're really looking forward to hearing what you say. So over to you.
Well, thank you very much. Hopefully anybody can hear me and see me also. First of all, I would like to wish that during this difficult year of pandemic, everybody of you is enjoying good health, and your family members and your dear friends and relatives too. It has been a really difficult year for everybody, and we are all aware of what we have faced in this almost 13 months now, but hopefully we will get through it and we will start our normal life again. I would like first to thank you, the organizers of this webinar. I think it's very interesting, and the fact that I see here that almost 200 people are logged in and are following us means that this is an issue that it's quite interesting for everybody. Second, I would like to thank Nina for the excellent presentation. I had the chance to see it beforehand, but like hearing the main points, it was also really satisfactory. Third, and you would allow me to say this, I was really happy to hear that even according to your analysis, Albania has finally a profile added to the statelessness index. It was about time. Has made steps forward, and it was mentioned in the presentation for positive change. And I believe that this is a huge, even the material we're publishing today and the index, it's an important contribution to raising awareness on the issue, to raising awareness both from governments around the world at this point, and to the public opinion also, which are really important in determining. And my last thank would go to the Albanian experts that prepared the TLAS NGO that prepared the Albanian index. I think they made really good work, and they were so insistent and positive that convinced also me to attend this this webinar. Well, I think that at this point the government has to take responsibility in addressing the phenomenon. I think the presentation addresses some of the key points of the problem, and that we are well aware of. I would not like to stay and speak about general remarks, because I think everybody of us who is, even according to the poll, who is attending the webinar knows the general problematics, what statelessness can do, what can it prevent, how can it be an obstacle to some of the services that these persons need and deserve, and how can sometimes bureaucratic procedures be an obstacle to what should be the normal course of life. I will be talking to Albania because I'm pretty much sure that with regard to the international situation, everybody of you knows much and better than me what's going on around the world. But if I see the numbers published from the UNCHR, that 10 millions around the world are in this status, well, I think this is an alarm, and it should be an alarm for every government to take the necessary measures to address this phenomenon. In Albania, I believe that even before 2020, which is an important year of change, we had a good legislation in place. We had a good legislation in place because Albania is part of the major international instruments to address the phenomenon, part of the major conventions and international agreements. And also it had in place some laws that recognize the phenomenon and gave and tried to address this issue in a practical way. When it comes to 2020, we believe that in Albania we had a major legislative reform. We managed to approve two major pieces of legislation, namely the law on citizenship and the law on asylum, which both of these pieces of legislation make reference to the statelessness as a phenomenon. And we are about to introduce, and it's being discussed in the parliament, a new law on foreigners, which enlarges the protection and allows people who are in this difficult position to enjoy their rights. And we are granting Albania right, basic rights. We are really that, which are education, to employment, to healthcare, and all the basic. What we are facing in Albania regarding this phenomenon, it's not an emergency, of course. Our numbers are really low, but still we have to address this phenomenon with some important amendments, also in order to adopt legislation which is in line also to what the international commitments of Albania is aligning the legislation with that of the European Union, since the country is one of the potential candidates, and hopefully we will start the negotiations really soon. I mentioned the three laws, and all of them address this phenomenon. What concerns us is both on international and national level. On international level, many times we are facing this migration from the east, the far east, I would say, through Greece and through Albania, people who want to reach Europe. But I don't think that that's a typical statelessness phenomenon. It's more lacking of documents of identification, and we are trying to do our best in order to try to identify and to offer everybody the protection they need. On the other hand, on the national plan, we are facing some minor problems, I would say, with the people of some Roma and Egyptian communities. But we are facing it in general because of the lack of their will to be registered. And on this regard, I think that together with the state institutions work, we should thank you also NGOs dealing with the phenomenon, because they are helping a lot in trying to convince the people and to assist them in getting the registration to the what we call the civil registry. We have worked.
Sorry to interrupt you. Could I just ask you for 30 seconds or 1 minute?
30 seconds, and I'll be finishing. Well, I want to thank you also the UNHCR, because we are working with them on establishing a database to identify the categories of persons that might be at risk of statelessness. So on this regard, since you gave me only 30 seconds, the last thing that I would say is that on behalf of the government of Albania, I thank you again for your work, and I express here our readiness to cooperate on any international initiative to address further this phenomenon. Thank you very much, and I'm sorry if I went beyond my planned time. Thank you.
Not at all. Thank you so much, Julian, for your positive comments and your commitments. It's really welcome, and your support for the index. So we will have time, hopefully, to come back to you for a final reflection at the end. So thank you very much. I'm going to turn now to our next speaker. So if I could ask Noras to turn on your camera. I'm delighted to now introduce Noras Rahal. Noras is a stateless scientist who was born a stateless refugee in Syria. And Noras, for him, education has been a lifeline, he tells us, taking him from an UNRWA primary school in Damascus to a master's in nanoscience in Germany, to work on the development of a COVID-19 vaccine candidate, and most recently to Vienna to start his PhD in nanoscience. And as well as a scientist, Noras is determined to raise awareness about statelessness and to advocate for the rights of those who have no nationality. So we're really looking forward to hearing your reflections and recommendations, Noras, and I will hand over to you.
Thanks, Nina, and thanks for ENS for this opportunity to take part in today's webinar. I'm glad to be part of this panel. As I am the only speaker here today who had such experiences related to the topic, I'm happy to share my perspective and more like a personal experience as a stateless person. So as you said, I grew up as a stateless Palestinian in Syria, the country that has entered a few days ago its first decade of the conflict without any resolution. And the effects of the Syrian crisis continue to cast its long tail shadows and implication on the Middle East and worldwide, even on the European Union, as an increased number of people registered as stateless has been observed recently. So I myself had to endure the first 7 years of the war in Syria. And during that time, I was facing devastating circumstances without a lot of hope, but I still believed that getting an academic degree is the way I should pursue. So I finished my bachelor in 2016 and was looking for an opportunity to study abroad. So I started to apply to universities while I was still in Syria. And eventually, after 2 years of long waiting and waiting long visa processes, I was admitted to the University of Kassel in Germany in 2018. But when I arrived at Germany with a lot of hope and enthusiasm, and I was struck by how statelessness is still impacting my life. So the chores of opening a bank account or having a SIM card can be daunting and exhausting, let alone dealing with foreign offices explaining what does statelessness mean. For that, my status under the nationality section was changed 3 times during my first year in Germany. So stateless, Syrian, and then undefined. And this is when I first stumbled upon the statelessness index. And I was trying my best not to get distracted and focus on my studies and my work. Shortly before the pandemic, I joined one of the Max Planck Institutes and contributed to the development of a COVID-19 vaccine candidate. But recently I was offered a PhD position in the University of Vienna, and I had to relocate from Germany. So in one of my recent appointments in the migration offices here in Vienna, where I expected to still find it hard to explain my situation, I wanted to be informed beforehand, and I used the index to collect information so I can share these information. So the normally tedious process was made a bit easier when I used the extract info from the index. I printed out more than 50 papers, and some of them were from the info documented in the index, and it helped me a lot. So I think we can't treat a problem without an accurate diagnosis of it. And this is what I feel the Statelessness Index is doing. And the index is one good step of a 1,000-mile journey to tackle global statelessness and to put an end for the suffering of one of the society's most vulnerable groups. So I believe that going forward and making the index more broad, more accessible, will allow us to feel we are tracking some progress here. So, and this can be made possible by making sure it's also available in many languages, for example, where both people who are stateless and officials can reduce the complexity. I believed, and I continue to believe, that giving stateless people a chance and allowing them to be part of their communities fosters their productivity and increase the sense of belonging in more effective way. Statelessness, of course, continues to deprive millions of people worldwide from full enjoyment of human rights and civic participation. And finally, in our modern days, where statistics and numbers matter, statelessness is still challenging to measure because affected people are frequently residing on the margin of the society. So I hope this will end very soon. And thanks again for the opportunity. And I'm looking forward for the rest of the discussion.
Thank you so much, Noras, and thank you for sharing your own experience with us and for so clearly highlighting some of the practical and wider challenges that are facing stateless people in Europe, as well as the example of how the index can be useful to stateless people in their communities, which we really hope it can be. And we definitely take note of your recommendations for how to improve it as a tool. So thank you again, and we'll come back to you afterwards with some final reflections at the end. So thank you. Next, I would like to introduce Gonzalo Vargas Llosa. So thank you, Gonzalo. So Gonzalo has been UNHCR representative for EU affairs in Brussels since 2018. And prior to that was UNHCR representative in the UK. He has also served in the Dominican Republic, in New York, in Panama, and in the Geneva headquarters of UNHCR, as well as on various emergency missions in countries such as Pakistan, Darfur, Sudan, and Libya. So Gonzalo, we're really looking forward to hearing your reflections, and I'll hand over to you.
Thank you very much, Nina, and thank you for that excellent presentation also. I'll be very brief. I'll make three main points. The first really just to
sorry to interrupt, Gonzalo, we can't actually see your camera. Did you intend to have it on?
Yes, let me just check.
There we go, that's it. Go ahead, thank you.
Can you still see it?
No, it's just gone off again.
Okay, then sorry, there appears to be a problem with the camera. Apologies, but you can hear me at least, huh?
We can hear you fine. Go ahead.
Okay. So first, really just to highlight the very good collaboration and partnership with ENS now for over 6 years. I mean, we see this very much as a a relationship bringing a lot of complementarity when it comes to addressing the issue of statelessness in Europe, and we really very much value this strategic partnership. Thank you very much also for your, as I said, for your presentation, and congratulations to ENS on the Statelessness Index, which really is a unique tool that allows for comparison of how different countries in Europe protect people without a nationality, and what they're doing to prevent and reduce stateless. So a big congratulations on that, and we also welcome what you mentioned, Nina, in terms of the work that ENS is doing to also to expand the coverage of the index by another 3 countries in 2021, namely Albania, Croatia, and Ireland. A couple of words maybe on the achievements since the high-level segment on statelessness, which of course was held in October 2019. There to note that out of the 40 state pledges received on that occasions, 8 pledges have been fully implemented so far, so about 20%, and more are in the process of being completed, including in Albania. We also welcome the record number of 4 accessions to the UN Statelessness Convention since the high-level segment. Of course, Malta acceded to the 1954 Convention, North Macedonia to the 1961 Convention, and Iceland to both conventions, bringing the total number of state parties to these treaties in Europe to 40 and 34 out of 49, respectively. As I think Nina also made clear in the presentation, statelessness is affecting people in all countries in Europe. And that's why our own advocacy, that of UNHCR, is not just limited to those countries that made the official commitments at the high-level segment or at the Global Refugee Forum. In fact, we engage with all governments on addressing statelessness across the region, and have seen some positive results, such as Ukraine's adoption of the law establishing statelessness determination procedures in July 2020. Of course, there is a need, an urgent need, I would say, to redouble efforts on resolving statelessness in the second half of the I Belong campaign. And to this end, we are supporting states and other stakeholders in follow-up on their commitments made at the high-level segment and at the Global Refugee Forum, and in closing remaining gaps. Finally, a couple of words on advocacy on statelessness at the EU level. Maybe I will start by recalling that at the Council level, the key initiative that has been achieved to date on the EU level was, of course, under the presidency of Luxembourg of the Council of the EU, when in December 2015 the Council adopted their conclusions on statelessness. In this context, we have continued to call on incoming EU presidencies of the Council to address statelessness and to advocate with other EU institutions, such as, of course, the European Parliament and the European Commission. In the context also, we welcome the collaboration with partners such as ENS in advocating at the EU level, while of course each respective entities does it in its own particular way. There are, of course, many migration and asylum international protection related policies, very complex ones from a legal and technical point of view, that are currently being considered at the EU level in a context which is very politically sensitive. But notwithstanding that, would like to make the point that statelessness is an easily resolvable and preventable issue if there is, of course, the necessary political will to achieve that. And of course, the consequences of inaction can be very, very grave, and now, of course, compounded presently also by the pandemic. Now, just concluding, also to inform that to gain further impetus on statelessness work across the EU, UNHCR has made some key calls to the EU on statelessness so that the EU can play a leading role in ending statelessness inside its borders and beyond. And as a final remark, just to inform those with us today that in order to monitor progress, UNHCR will convene a global refugee forum side event on statelessness in November, ahead of the high-level officials meeting in December, and that further events on statelessness are planned jointly with the Council of Europe and the OSCE, as well as to commemorate the 60th anniversary of the 1961 Convention. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Gonzalo. Thank you. And as always, we at ENS really value our collaboration with UNHCR and are grateful for your support for the index and other aspects of our work and that of our members across Europe. And thank you for your words and recommendations. So next, moving on, I'm going to introduce Frances Fitzgerald, MEP. So Frances, you would like to switch on your camera. So Frances is an Irish MEP from Dublin. She was elected to the European Parliament in 2019 and has been a parliamentarian for over 20 years, having served as Deputy Prime Minister of Ireland, as well as holding various ministerial positions, including Minister for Justice and Equality. And Frances is a strong advocate in the European Parliament for children's rights and also for gender equality, being a member of the Child Rights Intergroup and EPP coordinator of the FEM committee in the European Parliament. So if you're there, Frances, we're very much looking forward to your reflections, and I will hand over to you.
Good morning, Nina. My screen is telling me that my host won't let my video open up. So I don't know if you can do something there. You can't start your video because the host has stopped it, it's saying.
Apologies for that. There we go.
Excellent.
We see you now. Welcome. Carry on.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for inviting me to today's event and for giving me this opportunity to speak. I look forward to contributing and working with you in the future. First of all, well done, as others have said, to the European Network on Statelessness for this very useful tool and for your continued commitment to updating it and keeping it relevant and current. And we need to make sure it's used more in a more widespread fashion and understood. It's very practical, and I think we need empirical tools such as this so we know where to allocate our resources and our policy. And it also, of course, puts more pressure on everybody for public scrutiny of the issue. So I think that's very important. It's very clear there is an enormous amount of work to be done. And I suppose the most crucial issue is that few countries have dedicated procedures to identify and determine statelessness in law, as we've heard. Where there are only administrative procedures, a person's rights can be overlooked or refused on a very ad hoc basis. And there's nothing really like a clear structure. I think it needs to be codified in legislation, allowing for administrative procedures to be built on that basis. Legislation, crucially, can also allow a person to take action where the legislation has not been implemented, allowing for full resource and access to justice. I think the European Parliament and the EU institutions can put pressure on member states in this regard and can really work with them to ensure legislation is in place. I think we need to work at it at a ministerial and political level, but also through best practice sharing. The EU is very good at this at the level of civil servants. Let's not underestimate the importance of that. That would be crucial to making this a reality. We can look at it from many angles, okay? The European Union has recently turned its attention to mutual recognition of marital status across the Union. I think given this discussion as to legal status and registration of this issue, the momentum is there for a discussion on something as fundamental as statelessness through this and several other ongoing policy initiatives that are currently on the table, including children's rights, which I will come to in a moment. I think in the past, we've seen the Libe Committee working on this issue, a Civil Liberties Committee, referencing a number of resolutions and a hearing between the Civil Liberties and Petitions Committee on this in 2017. I think we need to do this sort of action within Parliament as soon as possible once we get back meeting in person again, or indeed as we're doing today. The issue is, of course, consistently conflated with migration. I think we need to own this, understand it. It's a bit of an elephant in the room. And as this topic becomes, very crucial in discussions in the Parliament, I think sometimes the debate on statelessness, there can be a reluctance to take it forward. So I think we just need to face that and find a way of discussing both in appropriate ways. It needs to be sent to the top of the political agenda, and that's why I was so very pleased in the European Parliament passed a new resolution on children's rights where the issue of statelessness was highlighted. Paragraph 23 is particularly strong. I won't quote it all, but it's a great paragraph asking EU member states within and outside the EU, improving the capacity of frontline officials to identify, record and respond appropriately to statelessness in the migration and asylum context, and so on, encouraging birth certs and everything else. So it's a very strong statement, and I hope the European Commission will pick this up. Just on Monday, my own group, the biggest group in the European Parliament, launched our own position paper on children's rights with a strong call to member states to ensure that every child has access to a birth certificate and identity documents as a prerequisite, of course, to belonging. And as we await the EU strategy on children's rights that will be released today, I sincerely hope the issue will be tackled there as well. As Minister, I brought forward an International Protection Act and gave force to many EU directives, including, of course, the 2004 directive. But I appreciate that isn't enough, and I do see the recommendations in Ireland today, and I will work with the Minister for Justice in Ireland on the issue again. So I hope that gives you an outline of where I see the discussion and action, hopefully going at EU level. And thank you very much, and well done on organising today, Nina. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Frances. Thank you for your support for the issue and our work, and it's great to hear, particularly of your support for the introduction of dedicated statelessness determination procedures, and for your reflections and recommendations around how the European Parliament can put pressure on member states in this area, and some of the examples of where there could be momentum for change on the issue of statelessness. So we really appreciate your support, and thank you for being a champion of the issue in the Parliament. So thank you. If there's time, I will come back to each of you for a final reflection. And I know you have to leave shortly, Frances, so I may come back to you first if that works for you after our final speaker, if you have any final reflections. But before we do that, last but not least, I would like to introduce our final speaker, who is our Director of ENS, Chris Nash, who hopefully needs very little introduction, and we're short on time, so I will just hand straight over to you, Chris, to give us your 5-minute reflections. Thank you.
Thank you, Nina. For me, one very clear message from today's webinar is that while accession to international instruments is always welcome, it's only ever a first step. Too many countries that acceded to the Statelessness Convention many years or even decades ago have since been paying lip service to their obligations by failing to introduce effective laws and procedures to identify and protect stateless people or prevent new cases of statelessness arising. The index is designed to shine a spotlight on this, but equally, I want to emphasize that we as a network stand ready to work constructively alongside states and other actors to fix these protection gaps that have continued for far too long. So in the 5 minutes that I have available to me, I want to very briefly reflect on how we can best do this, including to try to pull together and reiterate some of the points made by previous speakers. So we heard from Gonzalo how UNHCR's I Belong campaign can help to raise awareness and generate momentum at country level, including if more countries followed a very positive example of Albania, as described by Union, by effectively implementing pledges made at UNHCR's high-level segment on statelessness back in 2019. Albania is one of 14 European countries who together made 40 pledges in total at the high-level segment. And as a network, we will work with our members across Europe to encourage implementation of these pledges, as well as to encourage new pledges and action to address all the other protection gaps identified by the index. And there will be high-profile opportunities to monitor and take stock of this, as mentioned by Gonzalo at the side meeting ahead of the high-level officials meeting later this year, but also in the run-up to the next Global Refugee Forum, which will take place in 2023. But ultimately, although state-led initiatives are clearly crucial, there is also much more urgent attention needed by regional bodies to help drive and coordinate reform. So despite landmark European Council conclusions in 2015, rallying cries from the European Parliament and various Council of Europe initiatives, Europe still lacks a common approach to statelessness akin to regional strategies adopted, for example, in the Americas and West Africa. But in this regard, as highlighted by Francis, helpfully there are some real immediate opportunities that can allow the EU and other regional bodies to integrate a stronger focus on statelessness across relevant policy agendas. So one example of this is the European Commission's new child rights strategy, which will be released later today, and which has the potential to address statelessness through a variety of cross-cutting measures. There's also a role for the Court of Justice of the European Union in upholding the right to nationality of all children born in Europe, crucially so that they can in turn enjoy their right to EU citizenship, such as the current case of a child born in the same-sex parents against Bulgaria, which the court will shortly rule on. Similarly, the new EU Roma Strategic Framework for Equality, Inclusion and Participation calls on EU member states and enlargement states to develop national strategic frameworks to tackle Roma statelessness, and the Commission's guideline, echoed in European Council conclusions last week, are unequivocally clear in this regard, namely the need to end statelessness among Roma by ensuring universal birth registration and access to identity documents, formal status determination procedures, and universal access to services. The Potsdam Declaration and EU enlargement process also provide important advocacy windows to eradicate Roma statelessness in the Western Balkans in particular. And when it comes to migration, as outlined in our recent position paper, implementation of the EU Pact on Asylum and Migration can and must take account of the fundamental rights of stateless people. And it will be incumbent on all actors, including upcoming EU presidencies, to integrate these considerations into the negotiation of the Pact instruments. And as a network, we very much stand ready in advocating for all of the above. But turning our gaze away from the EU, another fruitful space for intergovernmental dialogue exists through the Council of Europe's European Committee on Legal Cooperation's Statelessness Initiative, which, as Gonzalo mentioned, will hold a major pan-regional conference on statelessness in Strasbourg this autumn. Also, the Council of Europe's soon-to-be unveiled plan on refugees and migration provides a further opportunity to integrate action on statelessness across all its relevant policy agendas. But in conclusion, pulling together and maximizing all these opportunities will require concerted action and new advocacy coalitions, critically including with people directly affected by statelessness, as highlighted by Naras earlier. It will also require an ever closer monitoring of law, policy and practice in order to hold governments to account. This is precisely why we have invested so much time and effort in developing our Statelessness Index. And I would echo Nina in thanking all our wonderful index partners and donors for their support of this. The index very much underpins all our advocacy and awareness raising work towards trying to eradicate the scourge of statelessness. And put simply, you can't stop what you can't see. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you very much. So I'm going to ask you to leave your camera on and ask all of our speakers if they wouldn't mind switching their cameras back on, so we have a quick panel session. We only have a few minutes left, and we actually don't have any burning questions from the audience, which means we've answered all their questions in our interventions, which is good. But I would just like to invite each of you to give us a final 1-minute reflection or concluding thought to the 200 plus people who've joined us today on the webinar, who range from stateless people themselves, civil society, lawyers, government officials, regional bodies. They're all here today, all working to some extent on statelessness. So if I'll come to each of you in turn, and I will start with you, Frances, because I know you have to leave. So go ahead, Frances, 1 minute.
Very much in a minute. I would say what Chris has said, the clearer the asks to the various organizations, Parliament, Council of Europe, member states, etc., the better the outcome will be. I think we need more awareness raising so that people understand precisely what they're being asked to deal with and the implications it can have if it's not dealt with at a personal, professional, family level. I think it's really important to hear personal stories. And I say that somewhat reluctantly, because I think it's a very hard thing to do, and I want to thank Naris for saying it, but it's actually essential. And I've discovered this through my campaigns for marriage equality and children's rights in Ireland. You do have to marry the political approaches with the personal stories of what this actually means. And I think together you can have a very powerful combination and you begin to impact. I think it's a good time, with a greater focus on children's rights in the Parliament, for example, to further this. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Frances. Perhaps Julian, may I turn to you next?
Yes, thank you very much. I appreciate the organization of this webinar, for everybody sharing their experiences, and I was listening really carefully all the persons who spoke. I was happy to hear mentioning Albania many times as a positive example in 2020. And I am here to say on behalf also of the Albanian government that we, with a new piece of legislation pending in the parliament that will be approved in 2021, we will have a more comprehensive legislative framework to work with, and we are aligning our legislation with that of the EU. I would share the same opinion of the madam who just spoke before me, that more commitment is needed from the European Union bodies on this issue, because we know European legislation influences a lot national legislations. And on this regard, I would be asking again that the European Union serves as a lobbying mechanism for us and for other countries in having these agreements with, especially with Middle East countries, African countries, on readmission agreements, because not only for the readmission mechanism in itself, but because it helps us in identifying nationalities and citizenship of people. Because what I said before is that in Albania many times we lack documents of identification, and those people are not really in a statelessness condition. Thank you very much, and all the best from Albania.
Thank you, Julian. Thank you for your comments. Noras, would you like to go next?
Yes, sure. I would like to emphasize, of course, on the ideas presented by all speakers. And I would say by embracing new bold steps and focusing on driving initiatives such as the Statelessness Index, give us stateless people a bit of hope. So I'm confident that such initiatives and that such discussions, same as the discussion we had today, will allow to keep sight on this important subject and ensure that stateless people are not forgotten during this challenging time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Noras, and thank you for being with us today. Gonzalo, a final word from you.
Thank you, Nina. Just 2 points. A practical one, just to say that the link to UNHCR's key calls to the EU on statelessness, I understand, is now being put in the webinar chat. And second point, and most importantly, just to highlight the importance of redoubling our joint and common efforts on the advocacy side, particularly in the last 4 years of the I Belong campaign, and the need, therefore, for this joint work between governments, international organizations, regional organizations, civil society, members, of course, like ENS and us over this critical remaining 4 years. Thank you.
Thank you, Gonzalo. Thanks very much. And Chris, last but not least, the final word.
Thanks, Nina. And there's not much to add to what has already been said, except perhaps to just again recognize the progress that has been made, but also to be honest in recognizing how much more still needs to be done on the issue. And for my part, to reiterate ENS's commitment to continue to serve as an effective catalyst for change, to mobilize key actors, and to galvan action to end statelessness. And as has been acknowledged today, I mean, this is afforded even greater urgency, given that stateless people are among those most impacted and marginalized by the COVID-19 pandemic. And now is undoubtedly the time to strive for a Europe where everyone is able to enjoy their right to a nationality. Our discussions today and the fact that we have had several hundred participants join and engage with this discussion gives me hope that by working together, we really can achieve this. Thanks.
Thank you, Chris. And thank you very much to all of our panelists for taking the time out of what I know are very, very busy schedules to share your insights and expertise. You've all given us a lot of food for thought to take away and reflect on. Thank you to all of the 200 plus participants who joined us today from all corners of the world for your interest and commitment. And we encourage you to use the index, to access it, to share it regionally at country level to different audiences. And please do send us any comments or feedback. Keep an eye out this year. We are hoping to roll out translations of the country profiles, which are coming soon and will hopefully be useful for you in your advocacy. But for now, 3 minutes over, but we're bang on time. Thank you so much. Have a great day. Stay safe and goodbye.